მოგეხსენებათ საქართველოს ერთ-ერთი მთავარი თემა რჩება რელიგიური ორგანიზაციებისგან საბჭოთა პერიოდში ჩამორთმეული ქონების რესტიტუციის საკითხი.
As you know, the restitution of the property that was confiscated during the Soviet time still remains a very challenging issue in the current period in Georgia.
მაინტერესებს თუ გქონდათ საუბარი საქართველოს ხელისუფლებასთან რელიგიური ორგანიზაციებისთვის ჩამორთმეული ქონების რესტიტუციის პროცესში დისკრიმინაციის საფრთხის შესახებ და რა იყო ხელისუფლების პოზიცია?
Just communities and whether or not you talked about the discrimination in the process of restitution of the property to various religious unions or minorities, and what was the position of the authorities that they expressed to you?
Yes, this is an issue that I discussed not only with various religious leaders and NGOs, but also with the authorities.
Դիախ ეს არის ის საკითხი, რომელიც მე განვიხილე და რომელსაც მივისაუბრე არა მხოლოდ რელიგიურ ლიდერებთან და არა სამთავრობო ორგანიზაციებთან, აგრეთვე სამთავრობო, ესე ვთქვათ, სტრუქტურებში თავრობის წარმომადგენლებთან.
And it's clear that the process of property restitution, as it has taken place up until now, has been marked by injustices and unfairness towards minority religious communities.
და როგორც ჩანს ეს საკუთრების რესტიტუციის პროცესი ახლა მაინც ხასიათდება უსამართლობით ზოგიერთი უმცირესობების მიმართ.
I've learned that there's an ongoing process of discussion between the various religious groups and the government on the restitution of property, and some progress has been made. For example, recently a synagogue and a Lutheran church were restored to their congregations.
მე აგრეთვე მომახსენეს რომ ადგილი აქვს გარკვეულ თქვათ პოზიტიურ პროგრესს ამ მიმართულებით, მაგალითად ვიცი რომ მოხდა ადგილი ქონდა თქვათ ხელისუფლებას შორის და ზოგიერთ რელიგიურ უმცირესობებს შორის მოლაპარაკებებს და რაღაცა შეთანხმება იქნა მიღწეული და ამის შედეგად მოხდა სინაგოგა და ლუთერანული εκκλესია.
But clearly much more needs to be done, and it's clear that there are many churches that belong to the Armenian church that have not yet been restituted to them.
რა თქმა უნდა, ამგვარი სამუშაო უნდა გაგრძელდეს და ახლა შეიძლება ითქვას, რომ კიდევ რჩება ძალიან ბევრი სომხური ეკლესია მაგალითად, რომელიც ჯერჯერობით არ არის დაბრუნებული.
I also received reports that many of these buildings are cultural monuments that are in an advanced state of disrepair, and that they should be protected as cultural monuments for all of Georgia.
აგრეთვე ასეთი რაღაცაც მსმენია რომ ბევრი აი ამ ეკლესიებისგან არის განხილული როგორც კულტურული ძეგლი და კულტურული ძეგლის სტატუსი აქვს იმის და მიუხედავად რომ მათი მდგომარეობა მეტად ვთქვათ რთული ანუ მდგომარეობა იმ თვალსაზრისით რომ ფაქტიურად იშლება და ინგრევა ეს ძეგლები, მაგრამ მათი სტატუსი არის როგორც კულტურული ძეგლი მთელი საქართველოს ასე ვთქვათ მასშტაბით საქართველოსთვის.
I was assured by the authorities that these issues are being addressed. I would like to see faster progress.
ხელისუფლების წარმომადგენლებმა დამარწმუნეს რომ ამ საკითხზე ისინი მუშაობენ და ძალიან ინტერესით მივადევნებ თვალს იმ ასე ვთქვათ შემდგომ განვითარებას ამ მიმართულებით.
შეესაბამება ეს მოქალაქეთა თანასწორობის პრინციპსა და ადგილობრივი თვითმმართველობის შესახებ ევროპულ ქარტიას.
So, do you think it is in compliance with the principle of equal rights for all citizens and with the European Charter of Local Governments?
I was informed that these discussions and legislative changes enabling the election of local mayors outside of Tbilisi are underway, and the government intends to move forward with it.
მე მომახსენეს და მომაწოდეს ინფორმაცია რომ ამგვარად მსჯელობა ცვლილებებზე რომელიც უკავშირდება ქალაქების მერების არჩევითობას თბილისთან დამატებით კიდე გარდა თბილისისა ეს მსჯელობა ჯერ კიდევ მიმდინარეობს
I'm not aware of which cities are included in the list. My own view is that all cities should be able to elect their own mayors.
და მე პირადად არ ვიცნობ იმ სიას, რომელიც თქვენ ახსენეთ, იმ სიას იმ ქალაქებისა, რომელიც უნდა იყოს შესული, ასე ვთქვათ, იმ ნუსხაში, რომელიც თავად აირჩევს საკუთარ მერს. ჩემი აზრით, ყველა ქალაქი უნდა იყოს, ასე ვთქვათ, ამ სიაში და ყველას უნდა შეეძლოს საკუთარი მერის არჩევა.
The way it was portrayed to me by a high-level Georgian politician was that this is an integral part of minority policy, basically by allowing people to participate more, to strengthen their feeling of belonging to Georgia.
ხელისუფლების ერთ-ერთმა, ასე ვთქვათ, წამყვანმა წარმომადგენელმა მე ამიხსნა ისე, რომ საერთოდ ამგვარი პოლიტიკა, რომ ერები იყვნენ არჩევითი, ეს არის მთლიანად საქართველოს, ასე ვთქვათ, პოლიტიკის განუყოფელი ნაწილი და მთავარი მიზანი ის არის, რომ უმცირესობებმაც იგრძნონ საკუთარი თავი, როგორც განუყოფელი ნაწილოთა საქართველოს მოსახლეობისა და უფრო აქტიურად მონაწილეობა მიიღონ მთელი ქვეყნის ცხოვრებაში.
So I hope that this logic would be particularly relevant in the context of minority areas of compact minority settlements. So I hope that this will be possible in those regions as well.
და ამიტომ მე ვფიქრობ და ვიმედოვნებ, რომ ამგვარი მიდგომა, ეს ლოგიკა ზუსტად გამოყენებული იქნება, როდესაც საბოლოო გადაწყვეტილება იქნება მიღებული ამ საკითხთან დაკავშირებით და უმცირესობების განხილვასთან დაკავშირებით.
We decided to set up this newspaper, which is called Arzagang, and to have as much as possible information provided to this population in order to promote their development as of mature, let's say, citizens of Georgia. Because what is more important in the process of democracy building, democratic consolidation, is the information. If you have information, then you can contribute to democracy building. And so I would like to ask you also another question concerning the level of political participation of minorities. These issues, they have been mentioned by the UN Human Rights Committee, by the Advisory Committee of the Framework Convention on National Minorities as some of the problematic issues, because the level of political participation, it is not sufficient, it's not proportional, and unfortunately in some cases there are some difficulties created for representatives of minority groups to take part, to get their legitimate stake in the process of political life of Georgia, and via participating in this process, in the process of democracy building of the state. So I would like to ask you about your opinion concerning the political participation of minorities in Georgia.
No, I think it's participation is one of three pillars in minority rights.
Sure.
One pillar is protection of identity through education, culture, traditions. Second is anti-discrimination, where we are moving forward. And the third is minority participation,
yes,
which allows minorities to have their views taken into account when policy decisions are being made.
Yes.
It's also critical for them to have a sense of belonging to the broader political community. So it's clearly important, and clearly there's a lot of work to be done in Georgia on this. Usually, with regard to minority participation, there are several obstacles and there are a number of opportunities. One obstacle, of course, is when minorities lack knowledge of the language. They cannot participate as fully as if they did. And this, I think, is a barrier for many representatives of minorities, especially in the regions, that their lack of language knowledge is insufficient to allow them to participate and feel comfortable participating in politics, in the economy, and so on. And the authorities are aware of this, and I think there has been some progress, but much more clearly needs to be done. The second is the approach and the readiness and willingness and awareness of the majority in reaching out and helping minorities, thinking, oh, we're all ethnic Georgians here. Perhaps we should invite and involve minority representatives and hear their perspective as well. So it requires a shift in thinking on the part of the majority and an extra effort for them to reach out and help minorities. So it has to come from both sides. I think there are some examples of good practice. I think this kind of the councils the councils which are attached to the public defender's office are good avenues to get minority input. I think this commission on interreligious affairs attached to the Minister of Reconciliation is also an example of this. But I think the next step, of course, is to have local democracy, but also to have the mainstream parties actively involve minority representatives in their work, and then to have them represented at all levels in the civil service. So I think clearly there's a lot to do here, and much progress still needs to take place.
Sure. And as you know, in 1999, when Georgia became a member of the Council of Europe, one of the recommendations of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe was to ratify the Framework Convention on Minorities and also the Charter on Regional Minority Languages during 1 year after the accession. And as you know, the convention was ratified in 2005, and the Charter is still without ratification. So did you have an opportunity to discuss this issue with the authorities? And what was their position with this regard?
Their position, yes, I did. This issue did come up in my discussions with the authorities. And what I heard was that they're committed to ratifying this convention, the Charter on Regional Minority Languages. And the question was when and how, in what context.
Yeah. Sure.
And apparently there are discussions underway on other legislative or policy measures to support the Georgian language, and I think that they see it in the context of providing additional guarantees to minority languages and strengthening the Georgian language and the teaching of the Georgian language and the use of the Georgian language. And I think that's fine, and I encourage the authorities to move forward and ratify this convention as well. I think that from my perspective, the first priority is anti-discrimination law. I think that's a very important step, and if that takes place, that will be a major step forward for Georgia. But I think this charter would be a very constructive step forward as well. So I look forward to continuing my dialogue with the authorities and encouraging them to move forward on it.
I would like to ask you, what would be your recommendations, maybe, or comments concerning the consideration of minority population through the prism of state security? And as you know, now we have the old ministry with new name, which is the Hata Zakariashvili's Ministry on Reconciliation and Civic Equality, which is dealing with those minorities who are under Georgian jurisdiction and with those persons who are wanted as minorities in the future under Georgian jurisdiction. And what would be your comment concerning this informal, de facto existing policy of consideration of minorities through the prism of state security and its implications towards the activities of the ministry and of the state apparatus as such?
Well, I think it's quite a common issue, actually, is that the securitization of minority issues in various European countries. I think that, and this was also something that was raised with me in my discussions in the Halkalaki, that people said, yes, the stereotype is we're all separatists, but we're not separatists, they all insisted. And I think it's, I think the most effective way to give people a stake in the country is to let them participate in decision making. And this is why I think local democracy would further that, would help to develop a stake and a feeling of ownership among the local population.
To get the legitimate stake in the democratic consolidation of the country.
Exactly. And I think the link, I think there is a link with the breakaway territories, but it's an indirect link. Because I think in order for the Abkhaz and the South Ossetians to be convinced that they can have a good life within an integral Georgia, they are also looking at how other minorities are treated. So I think the signal that the Georgian state could send to the Abkhaz and the South Ossetians is, you will be treated well like our other minorities, which means that minority policy does have an indirect impact on the future of those areas. but it is unusual to have a state structure dealing both with issues such as the conflict areas and issues pertaining to minorities. There is a link, but I think that the minority issues should be dealt with regardless of what happens in those territories.